Hello and welcome to the Embodying Philosophy podcast. My name is Floss and I'm your host, a scholar practitioner, yoga teacher and geek for all things embodied philosophy. In modern times, we all too often think of philosophy as abstract ideas irrelevant to how we live our lives. But in ancient and pre-modern times, philosophy was a way of life. This podcast seeks to explore and revive this understanding of philosophy as a way of life, embodying philosophy as the practice of meaningful inquiry in relation to our lives as they are lived today in a pluralistic and diverse world, through engagement with ideas, practices, and traditions across time and space, from yoga to Christianity and beyond. Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Embodying Philosophy podcast. Today we're going to ask the question, what is religion? Now, for many, religion is different from spirituality. Some scholars say we exist in an increasingly spiritual but not religious context. And what this represents is, more broadly in society, a fear or distrust of organized religion, of authority, and instead an increased value of individual autonomy. So spirituality is about the individual's growth, as opposed to the structures of tradition, the authority of a religious tradition and the prescribed beliefs, doctrines, dogmas that often presents. And there's also a great fear or distrust by many towards organized religion because of religious trauma. Many people have grown up in faith contexts where they haven't had good experiences, for example in the Catholic Church. There have been so many examples of abuse within religious institutions as well. So all of these factors contribute more broadly to this distrust towards organized religion by many. At the same time, who is religious in society today? Well, in an increasingly secular society, so that's a society where God and religion is less central than it has been in the past, people who are religious tend to be, or at least more visibly religious in our society, tend to be of a more evangelical bent, or even we might call fundamentalist. And we see this with a slight fear towards religion in terms of Islamophobia, in terms of radical religion, in terms of people who do things that we consider awful, violent, because of their religious belief and conviction. So it's really on this basis that I would argue religion has, for many, a bad name today in modern society. It's associated with superstition, false beliefs, ideology. After all, Marx called religion the opium of the masses. For the sociologist Althusser, religion represented ideological state apparatus which kept the working class subservient to those who ruled. And as I just mentioned previously, increasingly in the 21st century, religion is associated with fundamentalism, the ideal of a political religious state and political religious abuse. And within this context, only certain kinds of people are religious. If you say you're religious, at least from my own experience, people, your friends, your family might look at you funny. How can you believe that, they say? Do you really believe that? It's not true. But our ideas about what religion are or what religion is are not universal or objective realities. In this episode, I want to explore in more detail what religion is And in doing so, I want to offer a more nuanced or even productive and useful view and consideration of religion, one that we may be able to take forward without this kind of dichotomization between religion and non-religion, which seems to prevail in society. After all, religion itself is a construct. It's a symbol which represents things in society, and it has a history. And we might want to unpack this history and our understanding of religion in order to rethink it in the modern age. And I think this is especially important in the context of modern spirituality as we pursue meaning, truth, as we pursue embodied philosophy as a way of life. After all, many of us experience a crisis of meaning today in our lives as we seek belonging as well as meaning and identity. And perhaps religion, whatever that means, might actually offer some resources for modern times. So, enjoy the rest of the episode. Let's dive into the question, what is religion? When we think of the word religion, we might think of the world religions, often distinguished between monotheists, those who believe in one God, and polytheists, those who believe in many gods. At least this is what they teach you at school. Monotheistic faiths include the three Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity and Islam. And they all share, or at least those Abrahamic faiths share, some aspects of the same revelation, i.e. they all reference the Old Testament. On the other hand, polytheism refers to religions like Hinduism or ancient Roman paganism, which profess to a pantheon of gods. So that is multiple gods and goddesses. And then there's a religion with a question mark after it, such as Buddhism, which has and exists in a somewhat ambivalent middle ground, not necessarily professing belief in a god, but offering a path through which higher spiritual goals can be realized. And it is worth noting that some forms of Buddhism do feature gods or deities within them centrally. For example, through the ideal of the Bodhisattva in Buddhism, or Tara, who's this kind of goddess figure. But that is all details for another day. So when we learn about these kind of paths or religions or ways of life, they're often referred to as world religions. And to call them a world religion renders them comparable on the basis of their shared status as religions. But it also allows us to compare them because they are different religions. But they also are said to share something because they are religions or world religions. Now, what I want to emphasize is that world religion as a concept is itself constructed, is itself something that arises in time and space in a specific period of history, enmeshed in its own deeply political context. And that is the context of colonialism in the 18th, 19th, 20th century. And what scholars then argue is that this concept of world religion was brought into play because it was useful in a globalizing context, because it allowed people in power to define and distinguish culture and people and countries and ways of life. So we can contextualize this with a central example. And this is found in a book by Brian N. Pennington called Was Hinduism Invented? And Brian N. Pennington asks the central question, was Hinduism invented? So while Hindus today certainly cite, or most of them would cite themselves as Hindu and as religious, for Brian N. Pennington, Hinduism as a world religion was invented and constructed in the colonial period. Now, Hinduism has very old roots. So we might ask, how can a religion that is older than Christianity and Islam be a religion, yet an invented one? Like, how can it be invented? And this comes back to the central point I stated previously, that religion is a concept. It's a symbol which represents and refers to many things. And these are not necessarily objective and universal, but rather we created this label at some point, and this label has come to mean something and refer to something. And by religion we recognize practices, doctrines, dogmas, and so forth. So how then was Hinduism invented? Well, according to Brian Pennington, prior to colonialism in India, where the British and some other states ruled in India, prior to this, what we now call Hinduism was hugely diverse, and different parts of India, parts of the subcontinent, would worship different deities in different ways. There was no unified religious identity that was called Hinduism. So someone or people in one village might worship Shiva, they might be Shaivites, the god Shiva, and others might worship the goddess Durga. And they might have different ways of doing this, different practices, different cults, we call them, and not with the modern association of the word cult, but rather the idea that different people gather around different gods or goddesses. Yet, with the colonial encounter, the British were really valuing administration and categorization in order to manage and run India and the empire. And so part of this involved defining the practices and beliefs and ways of life they found in India. And they did this through defining Hinduism as a world religion, even though from the inside experience of India at the time, the people may not have recognized what they were doing as a world religion in the way that now Hinduism has come to be seen as a world religion. Suddenly, the way of life that people practiced, the diverse ways of life, came to be defined, categorized, measured, and Hinduism came to be seen as a world faith which was rendered comparable to other world faiths and world religions. So from this understanding, religion is a Western construct, or at least world religion is a Western construct, one that might focus on belief, doctrine, dogma, in terms of what truth is, and also one that makes universal claims, i.e., this is the truth, this is what God is, this is what Hindus believe in. And scholars actually argue that within the Indian context, prior to the colonial encounter, religion wasn't experienced in this way. It was much more fluid. And a scholar called Ramanuja, who writes very interestingly on this topic, actually, he would say that in India, there was more of an emphasis on multiple truths being able to coexist. Whereas in the West, there was an emphasis on one truth over other truths. And that, he would argue, is a result of Protestantism. But that is also another topic, I think, for another day. But what I've sought to emphasize and show so far is that our understanding of what religion is is not objective. It's the product of a specific historical development. And if religion then has a kind of bad name today, well, it doesn't necessarily have to. We can think about religion in other ways without denying, that religion has done some terrible things. I don't think anyone would deny that. But also seeing potential fruits and potential positive lights through which to think about religion. So, firstly, I said a moment ago that religion today has become predominantly associated with belief. That either you believe or you don't believe, either you believe in God or you don't believe in God. Either Jesus is Lord, Jesus is the Son of God, or he's not. And this is a very common view, especially of people in the West today. But this itself is a development from Protestantism. Protestantism emerged in the 1600s in the 1500s, the beginnings of it were founded by Martin Luther. And it countered and challenged Catholicism. And it emphasized faith, the transformative power of faith and belief in order to gain salvation. Now, over time, Protestantism emerged with the Enlightenment culture and the modern culture as it developed, leading to modern forms of religion which really emphasized belief. But prior to this, in the pre-modern period, Catholicism was the dominant religion and form of Christianity. And I think, I've probably talked about this a lot on the podcast already, and I will continue to, but in the pre-modern period, philosophy, theology, they were ways of life. The whole universe was deeply embedded with the mysterium, with the beauty, with the grandeur of God. Like, everyone was religious. Everyone saw God in the world, and God was a given. And over time, with this emphasis on belief, religion became more black and white. God is or God isn't. So that's the first point. That if we recognize that our definition of religion is one rooted in a Protestant faith, the development of Protestantism, we might also challenge that. So how else then might we think about religion? Well, beyond thinking about religion as the pure and right doctrine and belief, we might begin to explore religion as that which offers us the frameworks to live life by, a kind of organizing principle and context. We might also look at this as the context of tradition, of culture, one that provides frameworks for ritual through which we can participate and be formed by. As I mentioned in the beginning of this episode, religion today has some distrust faced by it, by people, and we live in an increasingly modern society where we value individual freedom and autonomy. But at the same time, many people feel lonely. They lack community, they lack tradition, they lack context. That with the decline of religion and the incline of individualism, actually we're missing that context, that tradition, that safe and secure net through which we can be formed, through which we can understand ourselves and others, through which we can grow and flourish. And we might then consider religion not as about beliefs, black or white, but as the context, tradition, place, community, through which we find meaning, ritual, symbolism, connection, through which we practice ritual, worship, celebration, through which we are formed spiritually, morally, ethically. And a prime example of this, I think, in England is villages and the parish. Many people have written on this, that parishes parish being the kind of borough or the religious borough within a certain geographical space. Parishes have traditionally offered huge support for communities, not just spiritually in a way that supposes spirituality is separate from materiality and daily life, but in a way that is deeply enmeshed in our material, physical existence in the world. And I think that's quite a beautiful thing, that parishes, parish churches offer community connection. And I recently went on a pilgrimage to Cornwall that I co-organised with a few friends, which was great fun. And one of the highlights of our pilgrimage was actually visiting and staying in parish churches. And at one point we went to a chapel on the top of a hill. It was called St. Nectarine's Chapel or something like that. It had no electricity and it was tiny. And we went for evensong. And there were like 25 people there. And it was just lovely. But it was also so lovely to see that community, see all these people coming together. And at the same time, we went to, events in the village hall, the church village hall. And that community get together, and also that sense of support. You can buy cakes for like £1 and they're the most delicious cakes. You don't get that in the capitalist society so much. You get the raffles and the sales of old items, and it's a really lovely support, bringing people together, not just for capitalistic benefit, but for something else, for community, and maybe for God as well. So on this basis then, what I'm saying, the peak of this episode is that religion, when we think about religion, it need not just be about shared belief. It need not just be about shared belief, but actually it's about context, place, ritual, practice, through which we mutually participate with people who are similar to us and also different to us, people who live in and around us. And we're going to be talking about this in a future episode, which I'm greatly excited for, with a guest called Edward, in relation to non-realism and religion and religious fictionalism. But what we're going to be talking about a little bit more in this future episode is actually diversity in views on pews. So what I'm saying is that while in this episode I've been emphasizing religion as context over content, that is a place, a space, practices, a context for worship, instead of the content of belief, the intellectual content of believing, of dogma, of doctrine, of that being black and white. In this future episode, we're actually going to talk about how belief may be different, how people may exist in the same religious community and context, but actually have very different beliefs. Even to the extent that some may consider themselves atheists, some may consider themselves agnostics, and some may consider themselves firm believers. And that people may choose to participate in religion even if they don't think it's intellectually true. And I think that is absolutely fascinating for our modern times, when religion may offer many resources to find meaning, community and connection in an increasingly isolated world. But many of us hold resistance to religion because we think it's just about belief, believing or not believing. So we're going to challenge that view in our future episode. So as we come to the close of this episode, I'll just add some concluding remarks to our conversation. That in this modern or even postmodern world, especially if we're pursuing a spiritual path, it's easy to be a free-floating and somewhat self-interested individual pursuing my truth. But ultimately, spirituality is also about connection, is also about love of the other. And we might ask then, what shared thing are we grounded in? Is our religion is our spirituality just about our growth, our happiness? Or is it about others as well? And if it's about others, actually, what do we share with them? How do we share with them? How do we connect to others and ultimately ourselves? And traditions, including religious traditions, they can ground us. They can offer the resources, the practices, the texts, the rituals, the community that grounds us in each other and ourselves. So it's not just us doing it all ourselves. And for many of us, we really lack this today. We lack that collective communal worship and ritual where we're not all always just doing it ourselves, where we can relax a moment and receive in community. And perhaps then religious traditions might offer us a deeper and more profound grounding than late modern consumer and capitalist ones. And that's a question I invite you to explore. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of more opportunities in this podcast to explore these kind of ideas and thoughts. So we have come to the end of episode 5 of the Embodying Philosophy podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I'm so glad to have you here. If you'd like to find more about my work, you can go to my website, www.philosophyandyoga.co.uk, or follow me on Instagram at philosophical_floss. I teach yoga classes in Cambridge. I run workshops online and in Cambridge. And I've got a few exciting things in the pipeline, including an embodied philosophy discussion group for yoga teachers and embodied practitioners. And I'm hoping to run this both in person in Cambridge and online, because we can do the movement, but we also need to have the discussion, have the community, have the connection. And that's what embodying philosophy is all about. Until then, see you soon. And join me on the next episode where we'll be exploring the very important question, what is authentic yoga? Have a great week. Bye-bye.